So, everybody, welcome to the Venari Partners podcast. I'm not from Venari Partners, but I'll be asking Steve Brown three questions today. Steve will ask me three questions. So I get to play the role of interviewer because I'm starting with the first question. What are the characteristics that you're looking for when you're accepting C-suite applicants? And naturally, when you're presenting those C-suite applicants to prospective brands?
So yeah, good question actually. I think the things I look for, I think one, communication. If you're in a C-suite position, you need to be a very strong communicator, both internally and externally for the business. So I think communication is one. That doesn't necessarily mean, I need you to respond really, really quickly to emails and stuff like that. We understand you're busy, but it's just more of a case of how you articulate yourself, how you come across, how you present yourself. Looking at your background, I think it actually helps as well. So actually the career steps you've made to get to where you are. Have you been involved in lots of different businesses? Have you worked your way up through the same business? How about yourself? So it'd be good to know, you've been on the side of the fence where you've been hiring teams. So my question to you would be, what are the most important things or what do you look for from a marketing team? Let's say you're growing a marketing team. What are the key things that you look for when growing that team? So
I like people who are hybrid. That means that they can do more than just their title. Naturally, they're or more than just their department. So for example, in a previous company where I was, my head of community management for a social, he also managed our PR agency in the States and also managed partnerships. And then I hate egos. If you're going to be on my team, leave your ego at the door. I don't care about, you giving yourself kind of kudos for the amazing job that you've done on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday. If you are doing an amazing job, then great, go teach the other people on your team the certain things that allows you to do that amazing job. So I have one for you, because I know that it's could be a bit different on the recruiting side. What are your kind of pet hates on CVs when you get a CV, and what do you recommend to kind of do differently when writing a CV and going through a recruiter?
Good question. Big pet hate of probably every recruitment consultant out there is CVs. So I would say the top three pet hates. One is too long. For me, a CV doesn't need to be more than 2 pages long. I think 3 at an absolute max, but I think you can get it down to 2. Second thing I'd say is like jargon, just using things like, is a team player, strong. I can work on my own or with a team, that kind of stuff, that will come out in an interview. You don't need to write that. Nobody looks at that little personal profile bit that people write about themselves either. So I think, keep it again. And I think that just helps to keep the CV shorter as well and more concise and to the point. And lastly, I think pictures. For me, it's just, either do you need a picture? Probably not, unless you're a model. So I think they're the 3 things that I'd probably say are the pet peeves. And I think, they're pretty easy solutions to get to grocers. How about yourself? Because again, you've probably seen tons of CVs, no doubt. What are your pet hates?
So pet hates would be too long. 2 pages for me is also pretty long. So I think too long is kind of a problem because you also don't read all of that. I also like to have it summed up in bullet points. So this was my title and this bullet point of what I've done. I don't particularly think that you need to put in your hobbies. I think that's kind of very relevant in a lot of cases. And then I also think dependent on the position that you're going to, I don't think that you need to put in your education, to be perfectly honest. I think if you're going to be a trainee or a junior, education matters. But I think if you're going to be kind of a midweight or senior or C-suite, your education doesn't really matter to me, right? It matters on your experience. So hypothetically, if you don't have if you're coming to be a C level, or if you're going to be a senior, I don't really care if you have an MBA. I don't care if you're a doctorate, and I don't care if you have a BA. I don't care if you worked as a bar back during your youth, right? If you have the experience and a proven track record, that's perfectly fine for me. Unfortunately, not everybody's like me, right? So if you feel you want to put your education in, put your education in. Languages are important, dependent on where you're actually applying, right? If you're applying to an international company based in Germany and you speak English and German, put that on there. If you speak English, German, and 30, 40 other languages, it's great to just say multilingual with others. I don't need to know all of them. So that's kind of my advice on a CV, as well as my kind of pet hates, so to say.
I think last question, I don't know, we got to wrap up, but last question is have you had any poor recruitment experiences? So any like interviews you've done, or like your own personal experiences as well?
Yeah, sure. One suddenly springs to mind every time I've asked this question and told this story without being asked this question. So I was looking for, I think it was a director of e-commerce at a stage. So we were chatting to a recruiter. We were going to meet this fellow on a Tuesday. On the Friday before, the recruiter said he actually would like more money if he comes to the interviews. Okay, fine. Yes, we'll pay him. His CV looks good. Then he was on the Monday, we found out, no, he can't do the Tuesday. He can only come on the Thursday. Fine. And then on the Wednesday, it said he would like 5 days more holidays. And I was like, oh, the CV is all right, but this is getting a bit ridiculous, turning into a bit of like, a kind of marketplace. Any case, guy shows up. I walk in, see the CV, I ask him to take me through. And then I say one thing, can you please tell me what is the biggest thing that you've done in your career that you're most proud of, right? And he tells me the story about how he did the global strategy for a global automotive firm, one of the biggest in the world. And I kind of knew instantly that that's not true. And the reason that I knew that that's not true is because I was the one that actually did that strategy along with my team at one of the previous agencies I was. And yeah, so I subsequently wrapped up the interview shortly, within about 10 minutes of that. And we got back to the office, and within 10 minutes, there's a scathing Glassdoor review on me. But I'll throw the same question back to you. What's your most awkward situation with a candidate?
Mine has got to be the time that we had this really great candidate and we presented him to one of our clients. The candidate went out, he met the C-suite, got on really well. It became pretty clear that they wanted to bring him on board. And, 3 meetings later, which included kind of 3 flights, that 2 were paid for by the candidate. We got to the stage where, they're about to pull the trigger. They told the candidate, okay, you're going to be coming in. This is the role you're going to be doing. This is the title you're going to have. This is what we can pay you. Unfortunately, it would overshadow the kind of HR department during that decision. And, I work with HR departments every day. Normally they get involved at the very early stages, if not the earliest stage of a search process. So it was a bit strange to start with, but, we went with it. They seemed pretty confident that they knew what they were doing. But turns out that the HR director pretty much shut it down. And kind of what I mean by that is I believe they still made the offer, but they made it at a much lower salary. I think that they changed the title of the role, and ultimately it just turned into a massive waste of time for the candidate. And I felt really bad because obviously the candidate had paid for 2 of their own flights. I think we actually said we'll reimburse, but ultimately it was just a bit of a shit situation, for want of a better word. So it was a bit embarrassing for us. Lesson definitely learned.
Live and learn, I guess. Live and learn.
Sure. Well, anyway, it's great to speak to you again, Jason. This is a slightly different format to what we've done before. So thanks for taking the time to speak to us. I'm sure, no doubt, we'll do a few more of these podcasts where we'll bring up some more topics. And yeah, to anyone listening, if you haven't already checked out the previous ones, please do. There's some great content on there. So yeah, thanks again for your time. And we'll see you again very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.